Hello everyone, welcome to this month's Transformative Teachers webinar. It's so wonderful to see that people are joining us from all the corners of the world. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping and then I'm going to introduce our speaker today. Okay, so today's talk will be about sustainability and the climate crisis, a topic unrivaled in its importance, I think. This webinar will last for an hour. We will be done by 5 o'clock UK time. Everything is recorded, so don't worry if you miss something today. The full recording of everything that you see and hear today will be available in a few days, and look out for the email that will tell you when the recording is ready to view. Your view now should be just of the screen that I'm sharing, myself and Christopher. Your videos and microphones are off, but please use the chat box to communicate, and you can also use the Q&A box to put your questions in. We will deal with as many questions as we can as we go through the webinar, and anything that's left at the end, as long as we have time, we will deal with them then. So it's good to put your questions in the Q&A box because they can get lost within the chat. However, the chat is a great place to ask each other questions. So if you think that someone else who's attending might be able to answer your question, especially if Christopher's talking about things and he's moved on from what you wanted to know, you could put it in the Q&A and see, or in the chat box, sorry, and see if there's a response there. All right, so today we are very lucky to have Christopher Graham with us. He is a freelance English language teaching consultant, teacher educator. I'm sorry, I'm speaking very badly today. Thank goodness it's not me presenting. Teacher, educator and author. He's worked in over 30 countries for the British Council, Ministries of Education and international publishers. He's on the IATEFL Conference Committee and the EVE Mentoring Committee. His recent work includes research on continuous professional development, language for resilience, 21st century skills and ELT in the climate crisis. He's also been working with the British Council as part of the Climate Action in Language Education project, and he's one of the founders of the award-winning ELT Footprint, a Facebook group and a website for sharing ideas, materials, projects, all designed to do our bit for the environment. Chris, is there anything important there that I haven't covered?
No, you've made me so much more interesting than I am, so I'm grateful to you for that. Yes.
Not at all. Your bio is incredible. Okay, over to you. Share your knowledge and wisdom with us.
I will share something or other. Yes, thanks so much, Lucy, as I say, for making me sound much more interesting than I actually am. I'll sort of start off with, obviously we're going to have slides and stuff, but I thought the climate crisis is getting pretty bad. There's no doubt about it. We're pushing ourselves into a corner, and we've got to do something. And unfortunately, I suppose some of the things that we need to do to mitigate, to reduce the climate impact, will involve changes to our lifestyle, either our personal lifestyle or our professional lifestyle. And some of the things that I think we need to think about are pretty big, they're pretty radical, and they're actually going to be quite uncomfortable for people. And some of the things I'm going to say today, I'm quite sure not everybody will agree with me, and that's absolutely fine. And I'm not necessarily saying that these are the things that we need to do, but I'm saying that these are the things that we need to think about, because it's time to actually do something. And as I say, some of the things that we might need to do will be potentially life-changing or make us work in a different way to the way we've been working for the last however many years. So there's that to think about. But equally, it's not really our fault. So I don't necessarily want us as regular members of the public in whichever country around the world, I don't know how many countries we've got here, I'm sure Lucy's counting them as we speak, the lots of countries around the world, however many countries we've got, it's not, generally speaking, the fault of the general public, of the general teacher around the world. We are not really the bad guys in this. We can all do something, but I don't want people to go away feeling, oh God, this is all my fault. What I'm going to do about this, and get what is perhaps known as eco-anxiety or even eco-grief. There are things that we could try to do within our orbit, within our world, but many of the things that need to be done are much bigger than us, and need to be making decisions made by people in the political world, political and business world, basically. I thought I'd just preface it with all that stuff. And now I will attempt to share my screen, and Lucy will tell me if she can see it. Share my screen. There it is, coming now. Can you see it, Lucy?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Okay. So the question is, are we doing enough? We being the ELT community, and the ELT community is huge, isn't it? It's teachers, it's directors of studies, it's ministries of education, it's school inspectors, a whole bunch of people. It's also publishers, people who provide examinations and assessment. It's a huge community around the world, and that's who the we is there. And I include in that community students as well, our students. Of whatever age they happen to be. So it's a massive global community of many millions of people. So there's the question. And to the question, there is an answer. It's not a particularly helpful answer. The answer is up to a point. Of course, we are doing something, and we're going to talk about some of the things that we are doing. Are we doing enough? Nah. Is anybody doing enough? But we're doing something. So I want to kind of start off by looking at what we are doing around the world in our community, or some of the things that we're doing, and then to use an expression, to bite the bullet and think about the things that perhaps we need to be doing a further step down the road. But that's my answer there is, yeah, up to a point. We're doing some things. If any of you have seen when I spoke for Trinity a couple of years ago, I actually showed this slide, which shows a way that I tend to look at, or have tended to look at, the relationship between English language teaching and the climate crisis. The first point about one there is the damage that we do to the community, to the climate. We as a community. Whether it's trees, energy use, flights, we have an impact to the things that we do. You might think, oh, English teaching doesn't have an impact. Well, it does. We'll look at how it is having an impact. So one side of the, if you wish, the analysis is to look at our impact. The other side, which I think is much more exciting, are the opportunities. A colleague and friend of mine, John Nag from the British Council, retired now, he once added up, I don't know how he managed to count them. He reckoned at any one point there were over 1.5 billion people learning English around the world. That's billion, not million. But if you take all the school children in India and all the school children in China, you can see where that kind of number comes from. So that is a great opportunity we have, don't we, really? Because we as English teachers, or as writers or publishers, whatever our role is in this community, we all have a chance to influence what, to a greater or lesser extent, what happens in these classrooms. That's the good bit, isn't it, really? So there's two sides to it. But I do think that the two sides are really part of a continuum. Mitigation, that is doing something about the damage, doing something about the negative impact that we make on the climate, is one side, and education is the other side, but they are completely interconnected. I don't think you can claim, I don't think a school can have a massive climate change education program on its education side if it is not doing its very best to mitigate its impact on the climate through the way it uses heating, air conditioning, plastics, all the other things. So to me, they're in a sense two ends of a line of a continuum. But mitigation and education, and it's those two columns, if you wish, I'm going to take to look at a little bit. So the question is, what are we doing? Are we like this man in Soho, standing around having a cigarette most of the time and not with his mouth open and not doing very much? To some extent, that summarizes this. I think we're kind of standing there thinking, well, we need to do something about this, don't we? It's going to get bad, but I'll just have another cigarette and it'll be okay. But that, rather perhaps not entirely honestly, does describe the things we're not doing, perhaps, to some extent. And I want to look first of all at mitigation. That is what we're doing about the damage that we do. These are the things I think we're doing, not necessarily things that we should be doing. That comes a bit later. Recycling. Well, I never thought I'd get a quote from Shania Twain into a talk about ELT, but here it is. Recycling don't impress me much, really. And there's a little extract there from the Guardian newspaper, just reminding us that recycling should be the very final thing that we do. There's the famous R's: reduce, reuse, and ultimately, if there's no choice, then recycle. And I still have schools and communities saying, oh, we recycle X, we recycle Y. Oh, fantastic. But really, that's not good enough anymore, is it? And it's not particularly new, but it's something that we do.
So Christopher, when we were talking last week, I was telling you that I remember in a school I worked at, the students would go and buy a bottle of water in the morning, drink half of it, leave the bottle in the classroom, and then at lunchtime they're going and buy another bottle of water from the canteen, and they could have just been refilling a bottle from the tap. And so it was very difficult to really feel like we were making any difference, because you see so much waste being created that you know, recycling just feels like it's making very little difference.
It's the final thing, yeah. But as you say, those guys with the water, they could reuse the water bottle, fill it up for the tap, or fill it up from wherever you fill water bottles from, for a drinking fountain, and continue using it every day through their 3-week course or whatever it was. Yeah.
And I think in the case of many of my students, they maybe didn't realize they could do that, because maybe they didn't know that the water in the tap in the UK is very safe. You can refill it, there's no problem. So maybe it was just that lack of awareness for some of them,
and that comes from the teacher, perhaps.
And that was exactly, and that seemed to be something, and no one else is going to be maybe telling the students that if it's not the teachers. So it was something that, but of course it involved one of the teachers in our team mentioning this and saying, have you noticed this? And then we all said, oh yes, you're right. And then we started saying something. So we found it was that kind of little seed in our school that started.
Then it grows. Changes. Absolutely. So recycling, to me, is the last thing. Paper handouts. I mean, are we reducing use of this? Genuine question. You might want to put something in the Q&A or the chat box. I don't know. People say, yes, we are not using as many paper handouts. I don't know. I can't go around every school in the world and count how many paper handouts they use. But, you know, it's been some years since I've been a teacher, but we were drowning in paper. Absolutely. Can you drown in paper? Anyway, suffocating in paper. People say, oh, it's better than it was. We're not using as much as we did, but I don't know. So that's a genuine question for the chat box or the Q&A. Let's put it in there, what you're doing in your school. The things that I think...
Actually, Chris, let's just pause a second, because I think that'd be really interesting to know. We'll see what comes up in the chat. Yes, I think you've you've hit on something with the recycling, you know, that it's not the solution. But yeah, certainly, please put in the chat and tell us if you are if you're using a lot of paper. I must say that I didn't realize for a long time that there was this big difference in my attitude at home and at work. And at home, I would be really carefully making sure I was separating my waste and recycling every little bit of paper and trying to buy things that involve less paper. And then in the school, I just said, oh, I'm in a rush, I'm going into class, I might need this photocopy. And I would just take huge amounts of paper in and not
use them once.
Dots.
I know, it's absolutely right. And that's what these webinars are about, really.
Oh, well, there's some things coming in. Sorry to interrupt, but there's things coming in the chat. So some people are saying, so someone in Sheffield is saying, yes, definitely using fewer handouts here. Louise, I think is that in the north of England? People are still paper dependent. Right. Sophie's asked whether there's any ideas on reducing paper handouts. Watch this space, it's coming. It's coming
at some point.
We try to reduce, but it's difficult. We recycle paper into handmade paper for the art department. That's really nice.
That's a nice one.
Really nice.
It's a new one on me.
But COVID Fran here says that COVID and online teaching has changed things, using Google Docs, but then students need laptops and things. So it seems like there's a sort of reduction, but maybe not as much. Yes, which is good. But But then I know that you've said that there are problems as well with the electronic alternatives.
So it also has an impact.
Okay, so
what you see here is a picture of an elephant in Hong Kong, actually. This is an elephant in the room alert. I've got a few of these, which is something that some of you may not know the expression. The elephant in the room is that when there's a massive creature behind you in the room that nobody wants to talk about. Well, this is one of the elephants in the room, and it's books. Now, I know some people here are from publishers because I recognize your names, and welcome, obviously. Now, I don't know. This is based purely upon my sort of, not even a calculation, my hunch, that in schools where course books are used only once, the average life of a course book, useful life, is 10 to 15 minutes. Students have the page, they fill in, do the activity, they fill in the form, they move the sentences around, they turn over, they go on to the next one. And they maybe only go back to that page if there's some revision or consolidation required. When I was at school 300 years ago, we had class sets. We had a course book that lasted maybe 4 years, 5 years, and people didn't write in the book. They wrote on a notebook or something, or they wrote in the book and rubbed it out. Now, I know, obviously, the entire publishing model, to a great extent, is based upon selling books. I fully understand that, and this is what I mean about disruption and elephants in the room. But maybe it's something we need to think about, whether it's class sets, whether it's, I know a lot of publishers are increasing digitalization. There are issues around that. It's something we need to think about because we do use a lot of paper in our course books, and that's just a fact of life. The photograph, by the way, is a woman sitting in a public library reading an e-book, which really tickled me. I don't know why she bothered to go to the library. Energy use, another one. Are we dealing with this? Another genuine question. Are we more aware of switching lights off? Are we more aware of switching off heating, air conditioning, anything that uses energy in our schools? Are we encouraging learners to switch off at the end, switch off the lights at the end of the lesson? All laptops, computers switched off. There's no little orange light, whatever color it is, on. Another genuine question. You might want to put something in the chat box about that as well. Is there an awareness in your institution of that? Well, I'm sure we're doing something. People tell me they are. Oh dear, there's another elephant in the room. Elephant in the room alert number 2. This is the elephant of study abroad. Study abroad has a flight impact. It has a very significant flight impact. And the calculation that I would love to be able to do, but I'm nowhere near smart enough, and I don't know whether anybody is to compare the impact of a flight against the benefits for learners against what they could actually do in their home country without traveling abroad to study. And of course, it's an impossible calculation because we're trying to compare 3 things that are totally different. But they seem to me to be the parameters of the debate. I don't want anybody, double negative coming, I don't want anybody to not be able to go abroad and have that time on a summer school or whatever. I'm just saying it does have an impact. And what are the benefits? And could they do it at home without traveling? I don't know. It's a very, very complex question. And I also think that study abroad does have a sustainability, a capacity building impact in the home country, particularly in the university sector, where people go to study, perhaps in Anglophone countries, in the US, the UK, Canada, or study through the medium of English in Germany or in Scandinavia, in the Northern Hemisphere, Australia in the Southern Hemisphere particularly. That must have an impact on capacity building in the home country because people are leaving to study, and in many cases they're not going back because they get jobs in the country where they study. So there is an impact there. As I say, it's an elephant in the room because lots and lots of people enjoy, and quite right that they should, their study abroad programs. And it's also a way that many people live. It's their living. It's where their jobs come from. But I'm just throwing it out there as something to think about.
Do you think that if courses are done online and students stay in their home countries, it has a huge impact on jobs, or do you think that it might just change the kinds of jobs that are available? I'm just thinking, if a teacher goes to the manager and says, I'm just wondering if we should think about changing our summer school model, if they're doing themselves out of a job. I mean, it's difficult to make that change. Well, or do you think there's just a shift and there's different kinds of jobs available?
I don't. We talk about the UK, which is the one that I know most, but it probably applies in other countries. There are lots of there are teaching jobs, there are school-based jobs. Well, moving online will have some impact, perhaps at an admin level, probably not on teachers necessarily, but it will have a huge impact on the income around it, the host families, the restaurants, you know, the cinemas, the nightclubs that all students go to. They're not going to have those students. You know, I was in visiting some universities in Scotland just before COVID came, and all the Uber drivers saying, "God, I hope it's not this bad," because without the students, we're out of a job, basically. So these kind of add-ons, the kind of hidden income, I think would be where the hit would be more than anything. Hotels, whatever students spend their money on. So it's something. It's a really complex thing.
I suppose, though, that everybody's going to be facing challenges as a result of the climate crisis in their own spheres of work, and everybody needs to work out what they can do. So it seems that, yeah, it's very difficult, though, isn't it?
It's horrible because you're talking about people's livelihoods. And if there's an organisation called Green Action ELT UK, which I have to declare I'm actually on one of their committees. They are looking at the way study abroad schools can green what they do, and I won't spend that link when you get slides or the recording. You can take a look at that link, and you'll see some of the initiatives and ideas that they're doing. So a lot of study abroad schools are trying to become more sustainable in what they do, but there are still flights in many cases. But then, you know, I don't know any of the answers. I'm very good at asking questions, not very good at coming up with answers, which is great.
In the chat, there's both sides of the discussion being presented.
Yeah.
One person here is, for example, saying that they're teaching online and also doing courses online. So I suppose that's something to maybe, you know, by people staying, I'm thinking people staying at home and studying at home means maybe they're spending more money in their own country instead of going abroad. So, you know, it can work both ways. But then, of course, there is that sort of cultural immersion that's being discussed.
Yeah, and how you calculate the benefit of that, so, I don't know.
Yeah, or how other ways that you could possibly try and do that in an online version, especially with a lot of new technology, then Google Maps and things. Maybe
AI and all
looking
that stuff.
For alternatives in a really sort of fourth dimensional way of thinking.
You're beyond me now, Lucy. But
just thinking about the last few webinars.
Okay, I'll move on. So as soon as we get to fourth dimension, I'm lost. Whoops. Conferences. Here's IATEFL. You know, IATEFL is doing that. Again, I have to declare an interest, a disclaimer. I'm on the IATEFL conference committee, so I have to be completely transparent about that. But, you know, the way that the badges are printed on paper, only for clear plastic, the plastic badge holders, lanyard holders, they've gone. Small thing, but, you know, 1,500, 1,700, 2,000 delegates, it does make a difference. And if you roll that out across conferences all over the world, so people are working away doing things. They're trying to change things to some extent. Business travel. Now, when COVID came, people stopped flying because they couldn't. Whether they were publishers, exam people, marketing people from schools and universities around the world, they basically stopped. I used to be a very frequent flyer. I mean, I've spent a lot, like, you know, 3 times a month on some occasions, a lot, much more than many people did. And I'm not just talking about a couple of flights a year. I'm talking about organizations that send staff around the world a lot. And I really wonder whether they need to. Because very interesting, I was involved in a survey and a project basically when COVID hit, or just the time COVID was hitting. And I interviewed a lot of stakeholders, and they all said, "Oh, we're never going to go back to this traveling. We don't need to because we've got Zoom, we've got Teams." And they said, anyway, our accountants have looked at how much money we spent traveling, and we're saving so much money. Well, obviously, the accountants didn't get what they wanted, because I know people are traveling a lot, and I really wonder whether they need to. Again, it's a question. I don't know the answer.
Oh, so you think that people thought that they wouldn't go back to that old way?
But they have, as they say, they're back to it.
They're back at it.
Yeah, absolutely, they're back at it. Maybe not as much as before. I don't know. Again, these are not things I can easily measure, but I'm just saying it's something we need to think about, because, of course, aircraft do have an impact. Again, lots of calculations around flying. Aircraft are getting better. They're getting newer. They're getting greener. They burn less fuel. All these issues as well. And we should also, I suppose, roll in the fact that the thing we're doing now, that is live streaming, does have an environmental impact. Again, there are tools only emerging now to measure it, but teaching online or having meetings online is absolutely not impact free. It does have an impact. largely as a result of the servers, where we're passing through as we speak now, and the impact of calling them. So, it's not impact free. It's a complicated game. But compared to flying, I don't know. Again, these are calculations that are very, very hard to do. So we looked at mitigation. So now we'll look at education, which I think is a slightly more fun side, I suppose, about the thing that we can do with our 1.5 billion learners scattered around the world. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, and there they are appearing more and more in course books, and that's just that they're wonderful. If you're not familiar with them, you can Google them, you can find them. And the great thing about these development goals, apart from their excellent intentions and structure, is that they have a clear framework that lends itself to teaching, and very good graphics as well, as you can see, which are really, even with low-level learners, you can do all sorts of stuff just with these very simple graphics here. They're a wonderful framework, and a lot of publishers are incorporating them into units of their course books, building units around them, and that is just great to see. It's really, really useful. And because they're universal, they're international, they're global, it's very likely that if the English class in Brazil has course books with it in, probably they're also learning about it in their other subject, maybe in their geography or in their science subjects as well. So because they're international goals. So I think that's a really, really positive thing to see. Project work. I have seen so many projects now of this particular one. I think was a project in Moldova that I was involved in. I just did a screen grab of it. It's a teenage project. Great progress. There are so many schools around the world connecting with each other, schools doing individual projects, environmental competitions, so many things. If you've got any you want to share, put them in the chat box. If it's something that you're involved in, pop it in the chat box and tell us about it. I mean, there are so many things going on. I put at the bottom a slight alarm, that is fatigue.
Could I just check?
Yeah,
so,
Lucy.
So this is for projects that teachers are doing in their schools where they're teaching their students maybe content-based learning. They're looking at the environment and what they could do, and then using that as part of teaching English.
Yes, they are, particularly for things like this case here, for example, developing presentation skills. This was a teenager, a Turkish student, who was who created and delivered a short presentation about ecology. So there's a language learning element, there's a life skills element around presentation skills, and of course there's a climate content element. And there are just so many all over the world. Some of them are in English, some of them are bilingual, where an English teacher is working with a geography teacher or a science teacher who provides, if you wish, a technical input as well. Just absolutely delightful projects around the world. Excellent. I do worry a bit about fatigue. Because I think climate fatigue is a thing. I mean, I do speak to teachers and I speak to all sorts of stakeholders, and people are saying, oh, have we had enough of it? I don't know. That's the worry. It's coming at us all the time, but, it's a problem.
Do you think people maybe feel a little bit like, well, we did that subject in the last 2 course books we used, or the last 2 terms of the class?
Been there, done that, yeah.
Right. Whereas I presume you're looking at it as more of a kind of underlying part of what we do in
it's not like the fascinating chapter about the London Tube map or something. Who cares? We've done that once, don't need to do it again. But and I know many publishers doing this now, rather than having one chapter about environmental topics, it's sort of scattered throughout the book and integrated across the book. But I do worry about fatigue, and I mean, I've been speaking to teachers recently. Yeah, it's all right, but another webinar about climate change or another topic.
Do you think part of the problem then is that there's just sort of one maybe slightly outdated view of what it means to discuss the environment, or maybe it's quite removed? It's let's talk about things that aren't happening in this country, just the sort of the general. Sorry, I just need to cough.
No,
you answer that.
Had your cough, right? Lucy's had a cough. Lucy's officially coughing. Gonna disappear. I think it depends where you live. Some parts of the world, particularly the global north, Northern Europe, people are only just beginning to see the impacts in their own backyards and thinking it's nothing to do with us. It's somewhere else. Countries that see the impact, and now, I live in Scotland, which is known for rain. Basically, the most famous Scottish product is rain. Well, until 2 days ago, it hadn't rained for 6 weeks here, and the rivers were running dry, and Loch Ness was the lowest level for 35 years, and they were worried about the monster. It's coming to us, and I think that it's affecting me thing will perhaps change perspectives for people, but there is that. I think people feel they don't understand the science. I don't know. Well, I really know this.
Well, just there's a question that's come up in the Q&A, so maybe this is a good opportunity to bring this in. It relates a bit more maybe to the first part of your talk.
Sure.
The question is, how can poor countries make some of the changes maybe that you were suggesting or discussing? Books are their option, and governments are not so proactive and eco-friendly. So what can be done? And also where there's a huge poor section of the population with no access to internet. It is a significant problem. I fully understand that. I mean, I think, and that's one thing that publishers have to grapple with when they're trying to sell into countries in the global south, when they want to sell digital products. In many cases, the technology is just not available. Though you'll probably find that in less developed environments, books are used year after year, because they're a much more valuable resource than they are in the global north, in wealthier countries. So if the changes need to be made, I think we need to look further north, to be quite honest. I think most of the climate problems are created by the wealthy countries. So I think it's by the wealthy countries with so much content of disposability, if that's a word it is now. They're the ones we need to speak to about this. That's my take on that, but I absolutely fully agree that some of these changes don't work in some contexts. It's just because of income differentials and things like that. So maybe it relates to what you were saying about trying to reduce as opposed to use and recycle. So it's thinking about those ways, like you say, a class set of course books. I think it makes a difference.
It makes a huge difference. But they're probably doing it anyway. Another thing that I think we're beginning to do quite well is what I would call radical CPD for action, radical professional development. If you don't know about Harry Waters and Renewable English, now is the time to meet him. Harry is a one-man climate change education machine. And the great thing about Harry is he's very practical. He's got his feet on the ground, and he manages to connect ELT and climate change education outside of ELT and bring the real crisis into people's classrooms. I won't speak about him anymore, but that's his website, Renewable English. So do go there or follow him on particularly on Facebook. I think he does a lot of stuff on Facebook, and it's really worth a look. And another interesting CPD project, there's a company called LearnJam. LearnJam provide a lot of online content for ELT, and they're starting these I suppose they're conversations called Learning for Climate. And the column that I put in red, because there's quite a lot of material on the screen there, I think is interesting. It's basically a weekly check-in of the people in this project, discussing what they've done, what they haven't done, what they need to do, what they mustn't do and shouldn't do anymore. So it's very much a call to action. It's making people do things. It's not just for ELT, it's for education in general. But I do recommend looking at LearnJam's website, because again, they're doing something rather different, something quite radical. So that's going on. There's interesting CPD going on, I think, in that sense.
Just a quick time check. We're just over halfway. We've got half an hour left.
Thanks. Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Lucia. There's lesson plans around, lots of lesson plans around. British Council lesson plans. I mean, again, I wrote some of those. I declare an interest, I suppose. There's lots and lots of online material for teachers now. Teachers who have access to the internet can find a lot of material, and a lot of the large publishers are providing much more sustainability content embedded into their coursebooks. It's getting better. We're definitely doing well on that. And as I say, it's all excellent. It's all good stuff. Lots of interesting things happening. So we can sit back like the man in the picture, have a cigarette, and think about the world. But I'm getting quite worried that time is against us. As I say, in my little corner, I live in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, as I said, and not having rain for 6 weeks has been a real wake-up call to me. And I don't like people talking about their personal journeys, but here I'll talk about my personal journey in the last few weeks. we have no water in our house. The only water we have comes from the mountain behind the house. It comes down a spring into the house, except it doesn't when it hasn't rained for 6 weeks. So we have very little water in the house. So we're having to use bottled water for everything. And I have learned just how much water we've wasted in this house, because I now know how much water you need for very simple things, because it's having to come out of a bottle quite often because it's not coming out of a spring anymore. So these kind of wake-up calls, increasingly, in my little journey, thinking we've got to get a grip on this fast, because the impact, okay, I'm lucky I can get in a car and drive to the supermarket and buy bottled water. I'm in a very, very privileged position. Many people can't do that around the world. So I think time is against us. So let's think a little bit about some ideas. Which have I heard of elephants in the room? I could only find a picture of one elephant, unfortunately, so you have to imagine that there's some more. And it's not a real one, it's made of wood. There we are. It's a long story. I think I said at the beginning that we shouldn't blame ourselves. If by ourselves, I mean us as private citizens around the world. If we're honest about it, the real problem is the global north and its relationship with fossil fuels, with oil and gas, and how the fossil fuel companies reduce our green choices. Because of the money they make from fossil fuels, they are reducing our options. Some of them, yeah, they are generating electricity by solar. They're generating electricity by wind, and they're looking at alternative. But essentially, they make their money from fossil fuels, and they're removing our choices. So really, if we dig deep down into it, it's the commercial and the political considerations underneath that we can't do much. We can do something about it, but we can't do much about it. So it's not that we necessarily want to buy fossil fuels. We don't have any choices. We have more choices than we did, perhaps, but we don't have very many choices because that's the way the thing is set up. So it's time to up our game. So are we, or will we be doing some of these things? And I'm not necessarily saying we should do these things. I'm just saying maybe things that we could think about. Let's have a think. Are we doing this? Are we encouraging and teaching the skills of activism? Are we telling our students that, you're 15, 16, it's your future, not ours, it's your future. Are you going to go on a school strike? Are you going to demonstrate? Are you going to write letters? Are you going to make podcasts? Whatever you want them to do around activism around climate. Now, I'm fully aware that in some political contexts, this isn't going to work.
Or in some schools.
Some schools and some contexts, though it's surprising around the world that people are doing some really quite radical things in countries where you wouldn't think they would. So it's not as straightforward, but I put that kind of qualification around it. But this is a question: are we doing this, or should we be doing it? I know many teachers are. I'm not necessarily. School strikes is perhaps an extreme at one end. Writing letters, or making writing a blog, or making a podcast, or even making a TikTok. Who cares what it is, whatever medium it is? Are we encouraging people to do that? Because the English is the language of the climate debate. Like it or loathe it, it's a fact. Yeah, it's the language of the debate. I wish it weren't in many ways, but it is. And young people understand that. They recognize that. So it's a question. I mean, some teachers possibly are. But I know some teachers are because they've told me about it. So it's something to think about. And
I was just thinking that perhaps teachers might just talk about activism as a part of their class, and they don't need to actively encourage or suggest. They could just talk about it, and then it sows a seed in the students' minds, and they might say, I wonder what we could do here to make a difference. So
depends where you work, in terms of the school, in terms of the country you work in, the political system, all these things. It really does. But it's something. You're right. It's sowing a seed and seeing what grows, basically, seeing how it's interpreted. Are we really applying those 21st century skills? Now, every English course book in the world now, I think, talks about 21st century skills. It's a slightly unfortunate name because we're in the 21st century. It should probably just be called skills now. I don't know. But, the ideas, particularly around critical thinking, collaboration, these key 21st century skills, they are designed for the climate debate. They're absolutely designed because, for example, if you take critical thinking and you ask learners to look at the website of a large company and making various green pledges, and then using critical thinking skills, say, actually, do you think this is real? Not really. They're not doing this, are they? Why not? Well, because look what they're doing this as well, aren't they? I see what you mean. 21st century skills are designed for the climate debate. In my opinion, in the past, they've always been sort of taught in isolation. Nobody quite knew what they were for. This is critical thinking. So what? Oh, great, fantastic. I can use this now because I'm looking at this company's website and it says we are a net zero company. Are you really? And for example, ridiculously, the large airport in London, Heathrow Airport, says that it's net zero. It's an airport. It's because they don't count the planes because they're not theirs. Isn't that ridiculous?
It's pretty funny.
Because you wouldn't be there if there weren't any planes. Oh, the planes don't belong to us. So it's that kind of nonsense that you could get learners to start applying 21st century skills to. Are we demanding course books that actually dig down further into the political and economic causes of the crisis? A lot of course books are talking about the crisis. They're saying we have this problem. We need to perhaps consume less. We need to consume in a different way. We going back to recycling and switching off the lights and all this stuff. But are we actually getting down to what the real causes are? Will course books be doing that? There's a couple of, if you're interested in a slightly more academic approach to the sustainability discussion and language teaching, and particularly eco-linguistics. I can't pronounce the first person because it's a Turkish name, Aksemi, I think the name is. But the references are at the back. Makes the point, really interesting point, but I've never really thought of before, that ELT course books have the widest readership among academic publications. There's a lot of them. So they're very well suited. It's a great medium to get environmental topics out. So I was saying before, because so many people are learning English. But Aaron Stibbe, who's an academic at University of Gloucester in the UK, and if you ever get, you'll find he's on YouTube, he's all over the place. He's amazing, some of the things he says. And he says course books are Trojan horse. That is a hidden way for spreading the values that led to destruction in the first place. The kind of ELT jet set, whatever you want to call them, characters in course books who are immensely successful, fly around the world, have lots of money spending on these things. Well, okay, maybe that's what caused all this stuff. And that's what I think Aaron is saying. And he also says course books take what he calls a shallow environmental view. In other words, we look at the problem and some simple solutions. Well, we can solve this by recycling. We can solve this by getting the bus to school and not driving to school. But actually, the problem is much deeper than that. So if you're interested, the references will be at the back. Take a look at these writers because they're both academics and there's lots of long words and references and opposites and things in them. But it's particularly Aaron Stibbe, he brings a lot of things together for me and makes you think, wow, yeah, he's actually onto something there. So are we going to be looking for course books that dig down a little bit deeper, or topics within course books? I don't know. That's in the hands of publishers. It's also in the hands of people who tell publishers what they want in their schools. And equally, are we really going to change our own personal behaviors? By the way, I took it in Sicily a couple of years ago. Use your brain; it's free. On the litter bin. Are we actually changing our behaviours? Now, the problem with this, of course, is many of us do need to make changes, which might be, as I said at the beginning, potentially life-changing. People who live in an economic environment where they've been able to fly quite a lot on holiday. Should we really be doing this? I mean, living in Northern Europe, you've got your EasyJet and Ryanair, cheap airfares. You can go anywhere for £30, not a problem. Easy to do, cheap flights. Should we really be doing that? So we need to think that through as well. As it says, use your brain; it's free. Now, one day you'll be like these two delightful old people who I photographed many years ago down on the south coast of England. Some of you may have pensions. Some of you may work for organizations, large, whether they're publishers or language schools, that make investments. Do you know, if you have a pension, where the money is invested. Is it invested in oil and gas companies? Does your employer invest for its corporate pensions in oil and gas companies? Many pensions do, because oil and gas companies make lots and lots of profits. And of course, that benefits the pensioners. So if you're not happy with that, inform yourself, find out. It's happening quite a lot around the world where pension funds are being encouraged to disinvest from hydrocarbon companies, from fossil fuel companies.
So if you're working with a school and their pension scheme is X pension scheme, and you find out that they're investing in things that cause problems with the climate, then what do you do? I mean, you can't just change pension if that's the scheme.
Well, you can lobby and lobby and lobby. There are ethical pension schemes. You can say, I don't want my money in this, and you can lobby and lobby and lobby and demand it. And change has happened.
So you might be putting pressure on the management or the HR department or some part of your organization.
But many people, I suspect, just don't know, or maybe they suspect it. It's a challenge, but we need, as I say, it's there are lots of ways of kind of attacking this problem, I think. Are we really lobbying ELT stakeholders? As I say, the ELT community has a lot of stakeholders, has publishers, exam and assessment providers, teaching providers like universities and schools. Could any of these stakeholders do better? If you think they could, tell them, lobby them. When your publishing representative comes to the school, ask them how their books are delivered. How are they shipped? Are they flown? Are they printed locally? Ask them how they package the books in boxes. Is it recycled packaging around the books to protect them as they're traveled? Are they wrapping books in plastic? Why are they wrapping books in plastic if they still are? Ask these questions. The power is in our hands to a great extent.
I have noticed quite a few little changes like that in my day-to-day consuming. Let's say I order something online and it comes in a different kind of packaging from how it used to come. And I think, I wonder what caused that change. Do you think, I mean, I'm not really on social media, but do you think social media has a big effect, when people talk about these things publicly and sort of call out companies? Do you think that's...
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. I think it is powerful. I think it's important. And I think also direct contact with, as I say, when you have direct face-to-face contact with stakeholders, saying to them, what are you doing about this? In many cases, people are doing a lot about it. They are packaging more sensibly. They're not using plastic. They're trying to print locally, trying to print on demand. They are doing things, but that doesn't mean we don't need to keep pressure on. All of us do.
You do feel that it's, so this is good. You feel like it works. So
I think it works, yeah, because ultimately we buy the products.
Maybe the representative goes back to the company and says, oh, I've had a few questions here. And someone else says, oh, yes, I had the same questions. And
absolutely. And the large publishing kind of, and the exam people, the school will ask. They are. I'm not suggesting they're not doing things at all. I know they're doing a lot, but we need to keep the pressure up. And I know some of the most radical people in the climate debate I know actually work for large organizations like publishers and exam people. They're internal agitators as well. So they're very happy when outsiders actually, we do need this done. We do need this change. Well, we told you that. The customers want it as well. So I think we need to keep the pressure up. And also tackling our employers on specific issues. I won't say who it is, though Lucy Boy knows who it is. One of the largest language school chains in the world, private language school chains in the world. Their boss, the owner and his family, fly around the world regularly in their private jet. And that is not good for the environment, however you look at it. So there may be individual things about your employer that you want to try to tackle. And there's Boris Johnson flying back from COP26 in a private jet, our former Prime Minister and yesterday's man, I hope. Almost certainly years now. And are we working with others, reimagining global ELT? Now, that sounds a bit Californian, but I do think we will get things changed by doing what we're doing now, by thinking big and asking big questions. Now, I want to tell you a bit of a story. I had a girlfriend once. That's not the end of the story. It's more to it than that. I had a girlfriend once, and her great uncle was a bishop in the Church of England. He was a top bishop. I won't say where he's from, but big city in north of England. And I only met him once. We got invited to his palace. Bishops live in palaces. Who knew? And we're sitting around dinner table. He was just an ordinary man, but he happened to be bishop. So I thought I'd have a conversation with him. So I sort of said, "How's your week been, Bishop?" That kind of thing that you say when you don't really know what to say. And he said, "Well, it's not been great." What happened? Well, he said, "I went to a primary school last week. Bishops visit primary schools." And he said, and I met there was a little boy. I mean, I did a talk about the church, and a little boy came up to me. He said, "Can I ask you a question, Bishop?" He said, "Of course, any question you like." And the little boy said, "Okay, Bishop, do you believe in God?" And he said, "No one had ever asked me that before. Ever." He said, "I've been," he was in he's long dead, he must be in his 76 or 77. "Never had anyone asked me that before." And he said, "It took me 3 days of no sleep to realize actually I do," which is quite handy given his job. He said it was the biggest question he'd ever been asked. It just shattered everything up, pushed everything out of the way. And I'd never forgotten that. And it seems to me we need to start asking big questions like that of ourselves and of our community. That actually cut away everything right back to it. Do we really need to do this anymore? Is there another way of doing this? The kind of "do you believe in God" question? Because he thought, of course I do. I'm a bishop. A ridiculous question. I don't know. I said, lucky he did, which was fine. But it's those big questions to say, do we really need to do all this? Do we really need to do all that? Or can we cut that away? But of course, the impact of cutting all that away may well be changes in people's livelihoods, their jobs, the way we do things. Because as I say, a reimagined world. So step one is coming to these talks, but it's only a very small step because it's half an hour of your time or something. It's a small thing to do. Now, so if somebody hasn't yet put in the chat or the Q&A, it's political, they probably will do. Because when I do these talks, it's very common for people to say to me, "You're trying to make classrooms political." Yeah, I am. But I reckon teaching any language is political. It's a political act, teaching a language anyway. And the climate crisis is political. So am I trying to bring politics into the classroom? Yes, I am. Because I think it's politics in its broadest sense, not about political parties as such, but politics in their broadest sense, that really is the way that we're going to attack this crisis, because it's what underpins the whole thing. So yeah, it is political. And I have no problem with saying, yes, I am bringing politics into the classroom. It's always there anyway. We just kid ourselves that it's not. And I know about the parsnips and the forbidden list and all that stuff, but hopefully that's slowly disappearing from our teaching. It is political.
And it certainly does give students a motivation, whether they agree or disagree, to talk, doesn't it? They have a real, genuine need to communicate on a topic if they have something they really want to share on it. So
absolutely,
from a learning point of view, it can be very, very powerful.
It's really powerful. And interesting with adults more than you might think, actually. Because, I mean, the assumption is always that younger people are more kind of understanding of the climate crisis, and what if sympathetic is the wrong word, but more radical in a sense. But so many adults, and the increasing their levels of English, in a sense, empowers them to engage with it more.
Well, there's a great question in the Q&A here about engaging parents. How can we engage parents in becoming more sustainable? With private schools, or maybe even with public schools, I suppose.
It's a really important thing, because parents is one of the I probably didn't mention for me is one of the stakeholder groups, a very important stakeholder group. Well, there are different ways of doing it. One I think is perhaps annoying for the parents, but even at primary level, to kind of do a lesson with the primary kids around I don't know, paper bags versus plastic bags, and then say to the child, when you go home tonight, ask mum and dad how many plastic bags or paper bags you've got in the kitchen. Ask them why they don't switch all the lights off when they leave the room. Or if you get picked up from school by mum or dad, ask mum or dad why they leave the engine running when they're waiting for you. That kind of annoyance habit. But yeah, most parents will kind of, that's fine because the child's learning about this. So that's one way you can do it. Even getting perhaps older children to kind of audit their household, that kind of thing. But I think the way to get parents involved is to speak to them about it. Not quite as we're doing now, but saying, look, this is a serious problem that we're in, and your child's generation, they're the ones who are going to feel the impact, the biggest impact of it, 30, 40 years down the line. And they're also the ones who are going to have to solve it. That's why we're doing this. And we hope that you will support us in this. There will be some parents who possibly don't believe in climate change, or they're flat earthers or something. Who knows? That these people are out there. But teachers tell me that generally parents are actually very good allies. They're very happy that their child is learning not only English, but is learning to engage with this crisis, this major topic, and that the language teacher is encouraging them to do that, and hopefully other teachers are as well. And that's an interesting point to make, that probably in many schools, government schools around the world, increasingly the climate crisis is being integrated into either geography or physics or chemistry or whatever or all those subjects sometimes. So English is just another way of attacking it, with a benefit that I say English is the passport to the content. Absolutely. And I think parents are great allies. So that's all I was going to say. Those are the references. But when you get the recording, you can see that there's the two Aaron Stibbe pieces and the Banu Kesmi, which I'm sure it's how to pronounce that name, the ones I mentioned before. So what I'll do, I'll stop sharing and you can hit me with a few more questions.
I think we've actually covered our questions.
Blimey.
Yeah, but you're making good time because we're just a few minutes before we need to finish, so that's great. I just been reminded as you were just on your last slide there about something that I read on the ELT footprint website that you were a founder of, and it was a quote from someone else, but it was saying the idea was that even if you're making a difference in one way but you're not doing something in another way, thank you for making that difference. And it had a whole series of things that maybe
that's that lovely
you're vegetarian,
poem, I think. Yeah.
You use too much paper, but thank you for doing your bit. And oh, somebody's put it in the chat.
That's the one. She's an Australian poet, and I crudely can't remember her name. But she's
Sophie.
She's absolutely excellent. And I think there's always compromises you have to make. I mean, I'll go back to my personal journey again. I live virtually off grid. We do have electricity that we use from time to time, but we generate as well. We have no water, no gas, no oil. We don't take anything other than water from the mountain and some electricity. But because I live in the middle of nowhere, we have to have two cars and we have to drive everywhere a lot. So that's that kind of that's my deal. When I lived in London, I didn't drive anywhere because you don't actually can walk everywhere. Here, I'm 45 minutes from the nearest shop, so I have to drive.
Horses, maybe you need some horses.
Yeah, it's not a good idea. I'm far too overweight for that and too old. But yes, people do actually ride horses around there. So I think you do one thing, you can't do everything. Yeah. You really can't do everything. But I don't want people to feel too much pressure on them. That's always the danger of doing it. Oh, I've got to do all this. Well, actually, you haven't. Maybe our main role is lobbying and influencing and saying to people, please, the big questions. There we go. The big questions. Asking people. Or
maybe for some people, the lobbying is their strength, and for other people, it's making little changes in their own life and doing
absolutely. It's very, very dependent upon your own context, your own teaching context, the kind of institution where you live, all sorts of things. But yeah, there's a lot to think about, I think.
There's a huge amount, but yes. And I noticed, just as you were starting, I noticed myself feeling nervous. And I think it was because I thought, God, there's a lot that I need to be doing differently. And
that's not the point.
And I think, by the end of this, I'm thinking, well, I feel less afraid of making changes because I don't feel so much pressure to do it. I think what you're saying is just lots of different ways of doing it, and we
shouldn't beat ourselves up about it. And it's very important, particularly if you teach younger learners, particularly teenagers, who can feel very beaten up about this, and they can feel I can't do anything, we can't make it any better. And that really is a very bad situation, because then I think people do just say, okay, I'm just going to pull the shutters down and forget about it. And that's dangerous. That's really dangerous. We want people to engage. We don't want them to feel guilty or depressed or beat themselves up, because it's not going to help anybody, is it? I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Very, very important. Very important. That's such an. If you don't have that starting point, you're not really going to achieve anything, and you might even end up sort of wasting more resources because you say, I can't make a difference, so what's the point in even trying? And then
give up.
So it's not about that. It's about anything you can do in your context. Well, thank you very much for coming to time. Thank you so much. That was very
You're welcome.
inspiring, even though it was kind of terrifying at the same time. So thank you so much. And everybody look out for the email for when this recording is available to view again, because there were a lot of ideas in here that you may want to go back and think about again. Next month, we have Gigi Lynch, who's going to be joining us from Buenos Aires, and she's going to be talking about strategies for supporting young learners of English from poor and vulnerable communities. So she's going to be talking about a project that she's done in her area. So another incredibly important topic. So thank you everybody very much. I think that this webinar will stay open for a few more minutes. So if anybody, including yourself, Christopher, would like to read the comments in the chat, then please stay for while it's still recording. But feel free to turn your microphone and your camera off if you want to do a little dance while you're reading or something like that. Thank you, everybody, and I'll see you all again next month.